So my question is, what is the total population of unemployed Americans at this point? Is it 7 million that gets us the 4.1% unemployment rate? Or do we want to add in 5 million on top of that are part-time that want to be full-time, plus an additional 6 million that don't technically fall into the unemployed category, but want to be working? Because if that's the case, that doesn't get us 7 million Americans. That gets us 16 million Americans. Episode number 36. Welcome back. This is the Expected Returns Podcast. My name is Luttman. I'm a real estate investor and agent here in the capital region of New York State. A lot of fun topics for us to cover today. However, before we do, a quick heads up, if you are interested in real estate investing, I did recently put out a video on a multifamily deal analysis. We cover topics such as debt service coverage ratio lending, appraisal issues, understanding cash flow statements, a lot of fun topics on small multifamily. So if you are interested in learning a bit more about that, you can head over to sjlincoln.com/video, and you can find that along with some additional content that we put out. Or if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, if you scroll down to the comment section and the notes, I'll link to it there as well. But again, that website was sjlincoln.com/video, and that is a multifamily deal analysis on a property I purchased here in the capital region of New York State. That's it for the intro. Let's get into the episode. The first place I want to look is going to be the jobs report for the month of February, which came out last week. 151,000 jobs were added to the economy. The unemployment rate for the month of February was 4.1%. Both of those numbers are going to be in line with expectations heading into the report. What exactly does a 4.1% unemployment rate mean? Well, within the report, we see that 7.1 million people are classified as unemployed. We're going to round numbers for this conversation, so let's just call it 7 million Americans are currently classified as unemployed. Two other data points I want to take a look at as we scroll through this report. The number of people not in the labor force who currently want a job. So the fact that they're not classified as within the labor force means they hadn't been seeking a job for the previous 4+ weeks, so they're not lumped into the unemployment number. However, these are folks that want to be working. Nearly 6 million Americans fall into this category, okay? Another data point we want to take a look at. The number of people employed part-time but would prefer to be full-time is an additional, call it 5 million people. So my question is, what is the total population of unemployed Americans at this point? Is it 7 million that gets us the 4.1% unemployment rate? Or do we want to add in 5 million on top of that are part-time that want to be full-time, plus an additional 6 million that don't technically fall into the unemployed category, but want to be working? Because if that's the case, that doesn't get us 7 million Americans. That gets us 16 million Americans. And with a total working population of, there's something like 160 to 165 million Americans who are working. Well, if technically there are 15 to 16 million who want additional employment, whether it's part-time to full-time or no employment to something, that's roughly 10% of our labor force who's not getting the type of labor that they want. So 4.1% is going to fall under more of a generational low, right? But if you actually take a look at what the labor force participation could be, if these people got the type of jobs that they wanted, is it crazy to think that an actual unemployment rate could be closer to, 9%, 10%? I think that's not crazy to think about, right? So here we have the labor force participation rate. I'll do my best to get everyone to take a look at this here. So this is going to be the total population that falls under the working age versus people that are actively working or seeking work. This is going to be the 1-year chart. I'm hoping everyone can take a look at this. So we do see that it is not only going to be lower than kind of your generational zoom out back to the 1960s, but it's actually descending as well. And we have not yet gotten back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of the population that's working. We haven't been this low since really going back all the way to the 1970s. And during the 1970s, it was much more common for both people both members of the family not to be working, right? It'd be more common for perhaps the woman to be at home, the wife to be at home. So we wouldn't necessarily expect that the workforce participation would be on par with where we'd be today. So a couple takeaways here. The labor force participation has been decreasing over the past 12 months. We have not yet gotten back to pre-pandemic levels, and we're actually right back to where we were in the 1970s when it was much more common for certain members of the family not to be working. What does that mean in terms of what people expect the economy to look like? So here we have the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment. This is going to be phone calls placed to everyday Americans once a month asking, what are your feelings about the economy? How do you feel about your personal finances? How do you feel about the economy? How do you feel about the way things are headed? And over the past year, we see that people's opinion, so everyday people like you and me, their opinion of the economy has been decreasing. And it hasn't just been over the past 12 months, but we can see we're at lows going back to levels that would be indicative of recessions. So if we take a look at the gray areas here during certain troughs, the gray areas are all going to represent areas of recessions. So for the most part, not 100% positive or not 100% certain. There's not a 100% correlation, but there's a very strong correlation between where we are in terms of consumer sentiment about the economy and they're actually being in a recession. So we know there are questions about employment. There are doubts within families in terms of how strong the economy is. What does that mean in terms of people's savings? Well, here we have a 12-month chart for personal savings. How much are families saving? And it's a pretty aggressive downward trajectory. So we went from a high of back in Q1 of 2024 of 1.1 trillion. And in just less than over a year, we've shaved off roughly, call it 25% of what people are saving. And if we zoom out a little bit, we'll go back to a 10-year perspective. This is interesting because if you think back to the level of the amount of savings we have today is going to be pretty close to where we were in 2016, 2017. Well, what do we know about those periods? We've had significant levels of inflation since then. So while the dollar amounts are going to be relatively close, the purchasing power that those savings can actually get you is going to be, call it 10 to 15% lower than it was back then. So maybe it looks like we're on par with kind of where we were 10-ish years ago. But in terms of what those savings dollars can actually get you is going to be significantly worse. So we have an employment picture that's a little bit cloudy. We have families that are unsure about the direction of the economy. Saving rates are falling. What does this mean in terms of delinquency rates? Well, first we'll take a look at mortgage delinquencies. So these are people's houses. These aren't businesses. These aren't large apartment complexes. These are 1 to 4 unit residential properties. And we can see the delinquency rates over the past 1+ years. They're growing and they're growing pretty fast too. Now the rates themselves from a historical standpoint are still going to be relatively low. So we're not at historical highs in terms of delinquency rates. What I want to focus on here is the trajectory that the rates are going. So just year over year, 10 basis points was the increase in terms of delinquencies. Right now we're right around, this comes to us from the Mortgage Bankers Association. Roughly 4% of all residential mortgages are in some form of delinquency, and delinquency means 30+ days past due. Interesting to note here, they do break it out in terms of the type of loan. So we see blue is going to be the spread between, and we'll kind of walk through this together. It can be a little bit confusing, but the blue line represents the spread between delinquencies in FHA loans and conventional financing. The difference between those two products is FHA is going to be more catered towards first-time home buyers. Generally, they're going to have lower credit scores. They're going to have higher debt-to-income ratios. So what does that get you? And again, the blue line is comparing that to a conventional loan. We see the spread between them is almost a full 8 percentage points. That's a hefty margin. So when we say things like, oh, we want to encourage people to get their, to get their first houses, we want to get them, grant programs, we want to lower credit score requirements. There are downfalls to that. And the downfall to that is going to be increased number of delinquencies, people falling behind on payments. So we know that the mortgage picture is not in a dangerous area. I want to make sure we get that across. We're not in any type of housing crash. However, again, the trajectory is not going in a positive direction. It doesn't just stop with housing. So we're also going to take a look at auto delinquency rates. And sure enough, over the past year, it's aggressively increasing. And this is going to be when we compare this to something like, if we zoom out 3 years, we'll take a look. It's pretty shocking the level of increase we've seen in consumers falling behind on their auto defaults or on their auto loans. There's a couple reasons for that. Interest rates over the past couple years on auto loans have gone up significantly, so it's becoming more and more difficult to make payments. And also, we know that since the pandemic, the purchase price on vehicles has gotten significantly higher too. So higher interest rates on your auto loans, higher purchasing points, it's becoming more and more difficult for people to make their payments. How are they making payments then? So if we know that the employment picture is a little bit shaky, we know that savings rates are going down, how are people able to stay afloat? And the answer is overwhelmingly using debt. And by debt, we mean credit cards. So here we have total outstanding credit card balances. So this is the amount of debt that people carry over month to month, is just over $1 trillion. And if we think about the average credit card interest rate, what is it? It's probably going to be somewhere in the 25% range. So if consumers have $1 trillion worth of credit card debt, just in a 1 year period, the American consumer is going to pay somewhere, let's call it $250 billion of interest on credit card debt. So this is pretty alarming. And on top of that, not only are we racking up significant levels of debt, but we're also draining our retirement accounts too. So this comes to us a yearly report put out by Vanguard. Vanguard is one of the largest asset plan holders in the world. And they found that in 2024, hardship withdrawals, so people that are taking out of their retirement accounts early, increased to 4.8% over 3.6% the year earlier. And actually, from the research I've done, the long-term historical average is going to be closer to 2%. So we're racking up credit card debt. We're draining our retirement accounts at a more aggressive rate than we usually are. These are all alarming matters, and these are all things that we want to take a look at. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to see a lot of stuff about tariffs. We're going to see a lot of stuff about, government downsizing, treasury rates. There's a lot of noise going on. These are a few of the individual metrics in terms of families, everyday Americans, that I'm going to continue to monitor as we kind of navigate throughout 2025. Next, we'll pivot to a topic that I see unfortunately becoming more and more common, and that's going to be the subject of deed theft. Now, here we have a local example of a woman that was arrested within the past couple weeks who is accused of deed theft. Now, deed theft is when you purchase a property and you take ownership. The previous owner transfers ownership to you via a deed. A deed is what makes you the owner of the property. So deed theft, in this case, could be something as simple as what she's being alleged as. No one's been convicted yet, but someone walks into a county recorder and says, Joe Smith is transferring his property to me. Here's my deed to prove it. That gets recorded. The fraudster now owns the property. We're not just seeing this here locally. A more national example you might be familiar with is about a year or so ago, someone tried to steal Graceland, Elvis's former property. When Elvis's daughter passed away, this person is being accused of essentially creating false documents that outline that there was a mortgage debt on the property. And now this person was attempted to foreclose on that imaginary debt to claim ownership of Graceland. You would think of all the properties to go after. Would you really want to go after the most famous property in the country? I don't know. I think that would be maybe one I try to stay away from. But again, that's a bit more complex version. What we're seeing more commonplace is going to be just fraudulent deeds because the documents are so easy to create. It's tough to prevent something like that. If we see that, if a county recorder sees that, okay, it appears Joe Smith signed it and it appears to have been notarized, it looks legitimate, right? So it's tricky to prevent things like that from happening. Steps you can take. Well, first, the best thing you can possibly do is, whether you want to do it once a year, twice a year, just check in with your county to make sure, hey, who do you have as owner? Who do you have as the current mailing list? If for any reason you stop receiving tax bills or school tax bills to your property, reach out immediately to figure out what the confusion is, because, best case scenario, you might be paying a late fee on your taxes, but it could also be someone else took ownership of it and now the tax bills are going over to the new person. So yeah, it could be something as simple as a phone call or going online onto your county assessor website and plugging in your address. When you sell a property, when you purchase a property, you might be familiar with something called title insurance. Title insurance will protect you, but title insurance is always only going to protect going backwards. Okay, so if you purchase a property, again, from Jane Doe, and it turns out down the road that Jane Doe actually wasn't the real owner of the property. She, however, by hook or crook, stole it from someone else and then sold it to you. Likely title insurance is going to be able to help you out to rectify anything that happened previously. It won't help you in the future. So if you buy a property and someone steals it from you, that's not the purpose of title insurance. Title insurance is to protect you from anything previous to you owning the property. So title insurance is going to be a help. Best thing, again, is just to reach out to your county periodically and say, hey, just checking in to make sure you have my right billing address and things like that. So be on the lookout. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to prevent something like that from happening. With artificial intelligence becoming more and more pervasive, that's not going to help things, because someone at the county could think that they're speaking with the property owner. It sounds like the property owner and they have all the, they can verify all the correct information. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the property owner. So this is a topic that's going to get more and more, I don't know if publicity is the right word. I think it's going to gain a lot of traction in terms of you're going to see it popping up all over the country. But be on the lookout, because deed theft is a real problem and it can be a real headache to try to unwind should you fall victim to something like this. And finally, we'll wrap up today with efforts by government to outsmart private markets and why it's unlikely to work. Now, last week, Governor Hochul of New York State came out for her State of the State address. One of the topics she covered in depth was unaffordability in housing, how it's becoming harder and harder for your everyday family to join the ranks of homeownership. In her eyes, the main culprit of this is the institutional buyers, your BlackRocks, your Blackstones coming in with their big stacks of cash, all cash offers, quick close. It is very difficult for your traditional family to be able to compete with something like that. She points to some research that suggests by the year 2030, 40% of all single family houses that are for rent are going to be owned by these institutions. She has two legs of a proposal to help rein in these institutional buyers. First is going to be, she wants to make it less of a tax incentive, less tax friendly for institutions to own real estate compared to smaller companies or everyday Americans. So decrease the tax incentives for doing so. Here's the second part that's even more interesting. She wants to implement a 75-day waiting period before institutions can come in and purchase property. So 123 Main Street goes on the market. Joe Smith from across town can buy it whenever he wants to. XYZ company that owns, this is an interesting part here, an institution as defined by the policy that she puts forward, a group or person that owns 10 or more properties. So not 1,000, not even 100, 10. Okay. So if you own 10 or more, you now need to wait, if this were to go through, at least 75 days before you can bid on that property. How much truth is it behind these numbers and how effective is it going to be? John Burns does a lot of research on residential real estate within the United States. His findings are that institutions, so folks that own 1,000 houses or more, represent 0.3% of the overall housing inventory, and groups that own 100 houses or more represent 3.8%. So if we say, okay, even 3.8%, so groups that own 100 or more, how are we going to get from 3.8 to 40% in a 5-year period? How does the math on that work? Well, there's something like 4 million single family houses sold in the whole country last year. So if we take a look at the number of home sales versus how many it would take to get to 40% ownership by the institutions, there are something like 14 million single family houses currently being used as rentals. So the math works out to something like they would need to buy 1 out of every 3 house that were to go on the market through the entire country. And if you look at, the everyday median sales price is right around $350,000, it would take trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to be able to buy the volume of houses in order to reach that 40% threshold that Governor Hochul claims institutions are going to own by 2030. Now, that's not to say that institutional owners aren't a problem in certain markets. Your Charlottes, your Jacksonvilles, there are certain Sunbelt cities that have been really taken over by some of these larger players where they actually do own 25, 30% of not only all the single family houses currently on the market, but everything that comes on, they are still actively buying. So claiming that institutional buyers aren't impacting local markets is just not true. It is happening in certain parts of the country that are very much in demand. In New York State, no, it's not happening. And in large parts of the country, right, from a total country perspective, institutional buyers simply don't have nearly enough money to be able to significantly alter the housing market. What is happening is that overwhelmingly people that own rental properties aren't BlackRocks and Blackstones. It's me. It's other local investors that might own 5 properties, or they own 6 properties or 10, right? And it's those people that own overwhelmingly the rental properties in our country. So to point to institutional owners as being the problem for our housing, I think does take away from the underlying issue of first of all, we need to be building more housing. Okay. How effective is this going to be? Well, if we know one thing about private markets, they love to find solutions to problems, right? So this is a problem that's being proposed. How are they going to solve it? Well, the easiest solution is going to be they're just going to create more LLCs, right? So they're not going to be tied to one entity. There's going to be multiple different entities that go up to the 10 property cap. They might form joint ventures with local investors to kind of escape the cap too. So, legally there is some wiggle room there. What I think makes the most sense is that they're going to be more and more active in terms of getting to sellers before properties hit the market. And this could be contacting sellers themselves saying, we want to buy your property. Could be forming relationships with agents in the area saying, hey, we are cash buyers. We will get you paid. You don't need to worry about, inspection issues ruining the deal. We'll get you closed quickly. Bring us buyers. We're ready to buy. Because guess what? If it doesn't hit the market, it doesn't need to wait the 75 days. So that's going to be the most cleanest workaround that I see, that I think makes the most sense. These large players are just reach right out to sellers and make connections locally. Properties won't be hitting the market. So if you are a local buyer trying to buy your property and suddenly there are now less properties hitting the market, how much of a problem are we really solving here? From a seller's perspective, how does this impact you? This is bad news, because now if you are in a market where institutions represent a large portion of the buyer pool, you now have less people trying to chase your house. What does that mean for your value? Well, you're going to get less dollars for your property than you were when there were more buyers. So if you are a seller of real estate, no bueno, you're not going to get as much demand. And if you're a buyer, you might be looking at a pool of homes that hit the market that are smaller, that is smaller than before this proposal were to go forward. So I think the players involved as institutions are probably going to be finding ways to outsmart this. I think there are going to be less properties that hit the market. And if you're a seller of property, you have less people bidding on it. That's no good either. So I think the property is pretty flawed. I think the idea that institutions are going to own 40% of residential real estate is bananas. It's just there's not enough money to make it happen. And I think the proposal, while it might be coming from a good place, I think just will fail for multiple different reasons. So that's that. That's actually going to finish up everything for today. If you enjoyed today's program, please feel free to reach out to myself. Leave comments. I love hearing questions. Honestly, one of the best things you can possibly do for the health of this podcast is to ask questions. So in the comment section below the video, feel free to do so. If you want to contact me directly, if you have needs for residential or commercial sales within the capital region, sjlincoln.com/book a call. You can schedule a call or a Zoom conversation with myself. Steven at sjlincoln.com. That's Steven with a V. That is my email address, goes directly to me, and I can certainly have a conversation with you. Again, if you are interested in additional content that we put out, newsletter goes out once or twice a month. That is sjlincoln.com/join, 100% free. You can get the newsletter. Check out the video I told you about if you're interested in real estate investing. That will be linked in the comments below, or sjlincoln.com/video. Please ask questions. I love hearing from all of you. I hope you got something out of this video, and we will talk again soon.